Greetings. Today I'm going to show you how to make a new kind of method. It's a method that will return an answer as a result. You use these methods to calculate things that you need to store for later. Let me show you a very fast example. Let's say I have a number and I want to square the number. We don't need a method to do this. You could just say num times num and that squares the number and we're done. But because I want to have a small short example that's easy to understand, let's create a method to do this. So using what you know already, you'd say public static void, and we could call it square because that's what it's doing. It's squaring my number. I know it needs an input, and I could have it display as an output a times a, which is the input value squared. So if I wanted to run this method, I could say square, and I could give it my number as an input, and down here in the console, you should see, yep, it's displaying 9. Because I know 3 gets stored into num. So when I call square num, I'm actually calling square 3. That 3 gets stored inside a. And I have 3 times 3 is 9, and that's what it prints. Okay, well, a lot of times you want to perform a calculation, but you don't actually want to display the answer. The whole point of the calculation is you're going to use it later on in your program. So, Here's the main crux of what we're going to talk about today. This word void, we can change this to something else. Void means this method is not going to return an answer. We might display an answer, but when execution jumps back to where we ran it from, we don't give anything back to the code up here. Instead, what we're going to do is, instead of displaying the answer, we're actually going to have this command return it as a return value. So we could say something like this: int answer equals the result of running this command. So what I want to have happen is I want, instead of displaying this value, for that value to somehow come back here so that it can get stored into this variable. Here's how you do it. The first thing I need to do is decide what type of information is my answer going to be. In this case, my answer looks like it's an integer. So I'm going to be returning an integer. Instead of void, you can type any data type you want here. And this is the type of information that your method is going to return as its answer. So I could have string here if I was returning a string. I'm going to have int. I could have double. You could have something else. Okay, the second thing that we need to do is, instead of displaying the answer, you can have a statement that says return. And then whatever comes after return, that's the value that is going to get returned as the answer from this command. So here I can have, let's actually just display them. I can say system.println square 3, and let's do this. Int answer equals square 5, and then I'll print out answer. Okay, so when I run this program, you see it prints 9 and 25. What's happening? Well, up here, square 3, it works just the way it did before. 3 gets copied into A. So this is 3 times 3, which is 9. And then when it says return 9, execution jumps back to where it came from, which is up here. But this entire command gets replaced by the return value of 9. So what we're really displaying is the result that this command gives back. Here, square 5 is the same idea. 5 gets copied into A. I do 5 times 5. It returns 25. And what return means is it takes that value and it goes back here, and this entire command gets replaced by the return value. So now it's like 25 gets assigned to answer. That's how it works. This was a small, silly example, and really there's no reason, if you're just doing a times a, not to put the calculation directly here. Like, what's the point of creating a whole new method? But let's say the calculation is a little bit more complicated. Like, for example, if I needed to calculate the distance between 2 points, let's make a command for that. I'm going to call it distance. If it's going to be between, here, let's write a comment. So calculates the distance between an x1 and a y1 and an x2 and a y2. Alright, so I'll need 4 inputs if I'm calculating a distance. They will be x1, y1, x2, and y2. Alright, how do I calculate distance? I'm going to use the distance formula. So I know I need to figure out what's the difference between the x's. So I'll call that dx, and it will be x1 minus x2. I'll calculate the difference between the y's, y1 minus y2. And now I'll calculate my answer. You might not know math.square root, but this command will give you the square root of whatever's inside the parentheses. So this gives me the square root of 2. I could calculate the square root of x1, like this. What I'm actually going to do is calculate the square root of dx squared plus dy squared. And this is just the distance formula. Alright, so this is a couple of lines of code. This is the answer, and in your old way of doing things, you would display the answer. Instead of displaying the answer, I'm going to return it. I'm going to say return answer. And now my method, you'll notice the red went away. Before it was red because, Before it was red because if you highlight over it, you can see it says, this method must return a result of type int. So when I put int here, it's like I'm promising that I'm going to give back an integer as an answer. But nowhere in here do I have a return statement. So it's not giving an answer. It's displaying something to the screen, but that's not the same thing as giving an answer back to whoever is trying to use it. So let's say return answer. Now it will be happy. And up here, we can actually use the command. So I could say system.out.println. What's the distance between 0, 0 and 3, 4? If you actually imagine what this looks like, those 2 points, 0, 0 and 3, 4, one side of the triangle will be 3 long, one side will be 4 long, so the hypotenuse should be 5 long. I can use the command again. I could say distance between 3, 3 and 12, 15. And now when I run the program, when I run the program, you see that it fails radically. Return answer. It doesn't like aha. So answer is a double. But look, I promised I was going to return an int. Well, that wasn't very smart of me. So, I mean, you could fix this by making this an integer. But the problem is that doesn't really make very much sense, because if I'm calculating the square root of something, that's probably not going to be an integer. So your goal isn't just to make these two values be the same. You got to think about which value makes sense for the answer that you want it to give. Alright, so double makes sense now. Everything's good. I can run it. And there you see the two different distances. Let me just convince you that it's not always a whole number. Alright, there we go. So I said the whole point of doing this is maybe you don't really want to display the answer. Like if you're making a video game and you want to see if your character is being hit by the missile, you're going to need to calculate what's the distance between your character and the missile. But you don't want to actually display that number to the user, because the user doesn't care if it's 27 pixels between your ship and the missile. Instead, you'd do something like this. You'd say distance equals, and you'd count, or here we'll call it dist, is, and you're going to calculate the distance between like your player's x coordinate and your player y coordinate and the missile x coordinate and the missile y coordinate. And then you'd do something like this. You'd say if the distance is smaller than 50, then you know your player's getting hit. So that's the kind of way that you're going to use this in the future. Again, you need to calculate the distance, but you don't want to display the answer, so instead it returns the answer so you can store it in a variable and then do other things with it. Okay, so far we've made methods that all return numbers. Let's do an example where it returns a word. Earlier on we wrote rock, paper, scissors, and we used a code where 0 means rock and 1 means paper and 2 means scissors. It would be really nice if we had a command that works like this. Let's say the computer choice is a number, it would be really nice if we had a command that would convert this number into the actual word that represents what that number is supposed to be. So let's call this convert to word. And if I give it a number, this method should give me back the corresponding word. So if I say convert to word 0, I want it to take 0 as input and give me the word rock as output. If I say 1, I want it to give me paper as output. If I say 2, I want it to give me the word scissors as output. Okay, so how are we going to make this method? I'll say public static. I don't want to say void anymore. Let's change that in a minute, though. The name of the method is convert to word. What kind of input does it take? It looks like it takes an integer, which I'll call choice. All right, so here I'm thinking, what kind of output do I want it to give? It seems like I want it to give these words, and I know text information is a string, so let's make void into string, because I know it should give me string information. Alright, so let's do some tests. If choice equals 0, then I want it to return the word rock. Alright, so far so good. If choice equals 1, I want it to return paper. Alright, if choice equals 2, I want it to return the word scissors. And that should be it. Well, it looks like it's complaining about something. It says this method must return a result of type string. Well, I am returning strings. I'm trying to return strings, so I wonder why it doesn't like it. Think about it from the computer's perspective. As far as the computer knows, this number could be anything. What if I tried to say convert to word 10? What's going to happen? The 10 gets copied into here. Choice does not equal 0, so I skip that return statement. Choice does not equal 1, so I skip that return statement. Choice does not equal 2, so I skip that return statement. But now I'm at the end of the method, and the method promised that it was going to give back a string as an answer, but I don't have a return statement to tell it what it should do. Well, one way to fix this problem is you could just say return nothing. Return the empty string. Or you could say choice does not exist. I don't really like either of those options very much. Here's what I like to do. Here I've got three possible input cases. I'm just going to delete the if statement for the last one. So this is like making scissors be my default option. If choice is 0, I return rock. If choice is 1, I return paper. For everything else, I return scissors. So now if I try to convert 10 into a word, it should return scissors, because it's going to skip this one, it's going to skip that one, and it'll hit that return statement. Let's make sure it works. When I run it, convert to word 10 gets replaced by the word scissors. If I have 0 here, it says rock. If I have 1 here, it says paper. So this is an example of how you can take an integer as an input and return a string as an output. In general, you can have whatever inputs you want and return whatever outputs you want. The only thing to keep in mind is you can actually only return a single value as an output. So if you wanted to return two things, you would either have to make two different methods, or you would have to learn about objects, which we're going to talk about later in the year. Alright, I think this summarizes all the basics to know about creating methods that return values. I hope this has helped.